Hello from the Scott Learning Center. We've been doing videos this spring and early summer. I thought we'd get back to one I've been talking about doing for a while, and that's a little more basic conversation about the basis of cotton and what a cotton plant does and how it acts and how it behaves through the year. I want to just say thank you for listening. This will be a multi-part set of videos. It's going to go into a little more of the basics of how a cotton plant behaves, and I'd invite you to stay tuned, but there'll be more than one of these. So I've shown this in a lot of slide presentations, and I think I showed it in an earlier video, but this is a representation of the yield potential that cotton plants and cotton fields have over time. Each 8-row plot represents the amount of area it took to grow the same amount of lint based on the year it represents, the production era it represents. 1937, it took 8 rows over there on the left that long to grow the same amount of lint we grew on the 8 rows on the far right in 2017. There's a lot of technology that has gone into making this happen. You think about what happened from 37 to 57, we got a lot of pesticides. We began to use synthetic fertilizers on a pretty broad scale, and then we had cotton breeding programs that made improvements also. From 57 to 77, we continued up that same path. We continued to improve varieties. Our pesticidal options became broader. And then from 77 to 97, you see we continued to improve. There were lots of good things that happened in cotton technology in that period of time. You had some revolutionary varieties that came about in the mid-80s, that being things like Delta Pine 20 and 50. We had the pyrethroid insecticides that came about in the very early 80s, and also plant growth regulators, things like mepicquat chloride came about 1980. Then in 95, 96, 97, we began to introduce Boll guard cotton. That helped us get control of some pretty devastating pests. And ultimately, when you look at the far right-hand set of bars on the screen here, that's really one of the final, and it's not the final, but it's really the culmination of all of this technology coming into its own. And there are a lot of things that are interactive in that. When you think about what we have today, we have cotton varieties that are greatly different. All of that has been enabled by changes we've made to the cotton production system, including the pest management system and the growth management system we use in cotton fields today. So you think about why all this happened. Cotton varieties change with the system. The elimination of the boll weevil is always a significant component of this conversation when we have it. The elimination of the weevil was a good thing, and I may do a separate video about my experience with the boll weevil and both before and after boll weevil eradication. But the elimination of the weevil allowed us to get better control of pests. It increased fruit retention. It allowed us to have a longer season if we needed it, even though we don't use it most of the time now. And it also increased our yield potential on an acre of cotton, as demonstrated by the graph I just showed. All of this has really been enabled by less determinate varieties that are coming out of breeding programs today. The payoff for that is those varieties require a somewhat more aggressive management approach. We've learned this over time with a lot of the germplasm that's entered into the marketplace over the last 40 years or so. Things like Delta Pine 90, 5415, New Cotton 33B. Everybody remembers 555, and now we're on to 1646, which is the biggest cotton variety in the U.S. today. Really, these varieties point out a lot of the reasons that we actually grow cotton. And that being a cotton plant is very resilient. It can respond to stresses. It can come back from stresses when those things happen. Now, the contrast really is between the crops. And I think there's no better place to have that conversation when you start to consider the difference between corn and cotton. And I've shown this before, and I think it's worthy of a revisit because it's very important to this conversation about what a cotton plant does and why it does it. When you think about corn, corn is a very deliberative crop. It is a crop that we have to plan. We decide on a population. We pick a hybrid. We do all those sorts of things early in the year. And there's 7 or 8 things that we do at planting in corn that we can't undo after we plant. They determine most of the yield potential for any given cornfield. The contrast is something like cotton. When you consider a crop like cotton, we pick a variety. We pick one that has the characteristics we want to use in our field. We plant it at a population, get close to a population that we set as a target, and then we spend the rest of the year reacting to how that variety behaves. and what it does and how many insects show up and how much it rains and all the things that go on in a cotton field. And when you start to consider the difference between the crops, I think it's worthwhile to talk about the nature of the crops. And that's really going to be the focus of this series. I'm going to stop there for today, and we'll get into really how a cotton plant behaves, what it does, how it does it over the next few videos. Thanks for listening.